Now, it's almost hard to believe that we're a little less than 2 weeks away from the start of the Ahsoka series on Disney+. Though it's almost harder to believe that, thus far, there's been absolutely no big controversy surrounding it, or an attempt at one by the media, when you consider we are about to get a Star Wars show where not only is the titular character female, but 3 women will essentially be featured and be the stars of it. I mean, if you've been listening to what the media has been telling us about Star Wars fans for the last several years at this point, or about a certain segment of the fan base, those who didn't like the sequels, it seems, that they can't stand female characters, much less female leads in Star Wars, well then this show should be receiving more hate and negativity than any Star Wars project before it, right? Not to mention here what these 3 female characters have to do, what the plot of the show is as far as we know thus far, is to go and find a guy who got himself lost in space and can't find his way back. These 3 have to go find Ezra Bridger because he's unable to find his own way home. The female characters need to basically go and save the male character, which should really rile up all those misogynists in the fanbase, right? They should be fuming right now at this. And yet there's been nothing of the sort, no complaints of any kind about the show in regards to any of that. Almost as if there's a reason why previous female characters, and pretty much only those from the sequel trilogy and some other pieces of content that were bad, there's a reason why they were rejected that has nothing to do with their gender. As if maybe it had something to do with, I don't know, the quality of the writing? Or how poorly they or the stories around them were written? Or maybe some fans didn't appreciate that some of them felt like little more than symbols for an agenda. And speaking of agendas, what's been interesting about the Ahsoka series, or the lead up to it, is how little talk I'm hearing or have seen thus far about how this is indeed a very, very female-centric show. You would think this would be kind of heavily celebrated right now, that there would be headlines or articles all over the internet talking about this monumental occasion that a woman of color was the main character of a Star Wars show. And though, sure, you can celebrate that if you want, and that, yes, there has been some of that online, don't get me wrong, but it hasn't been anywhere near the level one might think it would be. It hasn't been anywhere near the focus you might expect out of the media, almost as if they are actually smart enough to realize that the more they'd run with that story without it receiving any sort of backlash from the fanbase, the more it'd blow up their previous narrative. It's almost as if they've backed themselves into the damned if you do, damned if you don't situation here. Because, they want to make a big deal out of this. Yet they know if they do, they'll have to explain why in this particular case, there aren't those usual fans all mad and upset. Though you'd really think they'd run with the story anyway, because the media has long since mastered how to only focus on the evidence that backs up their narrative and to play dumb when it comes to everything else. And actually, some, though no major outlets that I've seen, some have kind of tried to run with the tired old argument about how terrible Star Wars fans are, mainly because they also know that a lot of people only tend to read headlines or maybe a few lines of the article before they move on to something else. So all they have to do to get it to stick with you, to get their narrative to stick with you, is to get your attention with that headline, earn the click, and it's mission accomplished. Doesn't matter how much truth there is or isn't in what they have to say. And this article here is a pretty good example of what I'm talking about. The headline simply says that Star Wars fans are the worst because they made Ahsoka cry. It's one that seems to want to create some sort of controversy where none is currently existing, or to sell that same old BS about how horrible and toxic Star Wars fans are. Because I think from the way they kind of worded the headline, they're trying to sell this as if it's something that is currently happening, when in reality it's talking about how Ahsoka was 15 years ago when the Clone Wars movie and first couple seasons of the series came out, how she was indeed rejected by many of the fans, and it brought Ashley Eckstein to tears, which she talked about a bit at Star Wars Celebration a few months ago. And here is the full quote from her that the article fails to post. When it came out, so many people hated Ahsoka. First, I sobbed into my cheesecake, but then I took a day to have a pity party. Then I was like, no, this character is amazing, and everyone is going to see what I see if they just give her time. And so I asked fans for their patience. I said, look, no character is perfect in the beginning, and if they were, then they'd be really boring. So please go on this journey with her. And I couldn't agree more with her. When a character is perfect in the beginning, they can be quite boring, which is, of course, why many rejected a character like Rey, for example. Though, do keep in mind it wasn't until after The Last Jedi that the dislike of Rey grew, shall we say, quite strong. Many, yes, were kind of grumbling she felt a bit like a Mary Sue after The Force Awakens. But they were still willing to give her the benefit of the doubt that the story, that the next film, would explain all that. Rey theories were one of the biggest things on the internet at the time because people wanted to find a reason to like her. And when it comes to Ahsoka, though I can understand why it hurt Ashley Eckstein, and I think that sucks for her, I do have sympathy. But part of the point of her being a bratty, know-it-all kid was for us to maybe not like her so much at the start, right? It was to give her plenty of room to grow, not only as a character, but on us, the audience, which, in the long run, worked beautifully. And that's not to be any sort of excuse for anyone who went too far with their hatred of the character at the time. But it's not like people aren't or shouldn't be allowed to express their dislike of a character in a story, and then to be proven wrong about that character later on. Though I think it should also be noted, since the article didn't want to talk about this either, but another reason why Ahsoka was initially rejected was because many fans simply did not like the idea of Anakin Skywalker having a Padawan during the Clone Wars. It just didn't seem to make any sense, and they couldn't see how it would even work, especially with no mention of a Padawan in Revenge of the Sith. Many just wanted to know, where is she and what was she doing as her master falls to the dark side and becomes Darth Vader. But anyway, to get back on point, I think that in all reality, Andor really fully dismantled this argument about men hating female characters in Star Wars, considering just how many were in that series, and no one seemed to have any problem with them whatsoever. And that was because of how exceptionally well written they were. No one had a problem with women of different races, of different sexual preferences, or anything being presented in that show, because it was about telling a great story and crafting some amazing characters first and foremost, which is what all Star Wars fans truly want and care about. Which is why no one is upset about the Ahsoka series right now, because these three female leads, Ahsoka, Sabine, and Hera, though I don't know that Hera will be in there as much as, say, Ahsoka and Sabine. Anyway, these three characters have previously been established and handled really well. And so fans are happy to see them come back because of that. They want to see their stories continue because it's always been about the story with them, not about any sort of agenda. And I, for one, hope the series is and does fantastic, not only because I'm a fan of Ahsoka and I'm always a fan of Star Wars, I always do root for it, but to further put a nail in the coffin of this ridiculous narrative about men hating female characters in Star Wars, just because there's been a few of them that have indeed been rejected, even though when you step back and take a look, it wasn't just those characters that were rejected, but the stories they were in on the whole. It's always been bad writing and bad characters in general that Star Wars fans hate. No more, no less. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about all this. Do you think this narrative that men don't want women or female characters in Star Wars has always been wrong? Or maybe do you think there is some truth to it? Whatever the case may be, leave your comments below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.